You felt it long before you had language for it. That quiet knowing, that strange separation, that sense that your life was moving through invisible battles others could not see. You tried to ignore it. You tried to live like everyone else. But something inside you would not let you, because you were never ordinary. You were marked. And the moment you began to awaken to that truth, everything changed. Suddenly, you saw patterns others missed. You felt energy shifts in rooms. You sensed motives behind smiles. You recognized darkness hiding behind ordinary conversations. It was disorienting, exciting, terrifying, lonely. You began to realize that your awareness was different, not better, different. And with that awakening came a dangerous misunderstanding that many chosen ones quietly fall into. A misunderstanding the enemy loves. Because if he cannot stop your awakening, he will try to stall your promotion. Listen carefully. There are levels to spiritual authority, levels to assignment, levels to influence, levels to the kind of power heaven can trust you with. Awakening is not the destination, it is the doorway. But many chosen ones step through that doorway and then unknowingly build a camp right there. They stop moving, not because they are weak, but because the ego is subtle. It does not always appear as arrogance. Sometimes it appears as quiet satisfaction, a whisper that says, "You've arrived." But heaven does not promote those who arrive. Heaven promotes those who remain humble enough to keep evolving. That is why today you must understand something critical. There are 9 subtle ego traps that delay the promotion of the chosen. Not obvious traps, subtle ones, spiritual ones, traps that only appear after awakening begins. And if you recognize them early, you move faster into authority. But if you do not see them, you can stay stuck in the same spiritual level for years. Not because you were rejected, but because you unknowingly paused the process. And if this message resonates with something deep inside you, take a moment and claim your place here. Subscribe to this channel, because this space was built for those walking this narrow path. Not everyone will understand what you are hearing right now, but the chosen will. Now listen closely, because the first trap hides behind something that feels almost righteous, almost spiritual, but it quietly blocks elevation. First, ego trap number 1. Believing your awakening already makes you complete. This happens more often than you think. You begin to see what others cannot see. You start recognizing patterns of manipulation. Spiritual warfare becomes visible. Truth begins to rise inside your awareness. And suddenly everything makes sense. Why you never fit in, why relationships collapsed, why people reacted strangely to your presence. The awakening explains your past. And that moment feels powerful. It feels like arrival. But hear this carefully. Awareness is not authority. Seeing the battlefield is not the same as ruling the battlefield. Many chosen ones receive revelation and then unknowingly stop there. They become collectors of insight. They understand energy. They speak about consciousness. They analyze spiritual patterns. But heaven is not looking for observers. Heaven is looking for rulers. And rulership demands something the ego does not enjoy: humility, real humility. The kind that says, "I have seen the doorway, but I have not yet explored the house." Your awakening was not the crown. It was the invitation. But the ego whispers something dangerous. You already know. You already see. You've already reached the level others are trying to find. And that quiet whisper slows your growth. Because when the mind believes it has arrived, it stops surrendering. But the chosen who rise higher remain teachable. Even after awakening, even after revelation, even after spiritual encounters. They stay low, they stay curious, they stay surrendered, because they understand something powerful. The higher the authority, the deeper the humility must go. And if your life has felt like a series of lessons, repeated lessons, stretching lessons, it is not punishment, it is preparation. Because heaven will never promote someone who stops growing the moment they become aware. Your awakening was the beginning, not the completion. And the moment you accept that truth, something powerful begins to happen. You accelerate again, you rise again. You step out of stagnation and back into movement. But this was only the first trap. And the second one is even more subtle. Second, Ego trap number 2 hides in a place most chosen ones do not expect. Recognition, the quiet hunger to be seen. You may not say it out loud, you may not even admit it to yourself, but deep inside there can still be a small voice asking, why don't they see it? Why don't they recognize the calling on your life? Why don't they acknowledge the wisdom you carry? Why do they overlook the strength you have built through warfare? You have endured things they would collapse under. You have survived spiritual battles no one around you even noticed. You fought darkness in silence. You carried revelation alone. You walked through isolation that almost broke you. So naturally, a part of you expects the world to eventually say, we see you now. But listen carefully, that expectation is where the trap begins. Because the ego feeds on recognition. It wants witnesses. It wants applause. It wants confirmation from human eyes. And when that confirmation does not come, frustration begins to grow. You start questioning the assignment. You start wondering if your voice matters. You start asking silent questions in the night. Am I invisible? But the truth is far more powerful than that. You are not invisible. You are hidden. And those are not the same thing. Hidden is strategic. Hidden is protective. Hidden is how heaven prepares its most trusted vessels. Look at the pattern. Before elevation, there is obscurity. Before authority, there is anonymity. Before influence, there is silence. This is not rejection. This is training. Because if recognition becomes the oxygen for your identity, your authority will always be fragile. Anyone who needs applause to move will eventually be controlled by silence. And the enemy knows this. That is why he constantly tempts chosen ones with visibility too early. He whispers things like, show them who you are, make them notice, prove your calling. But heaven moves differently. Heaven develops power in secret. Authority grows in quiet places, in rooms where no one claps, in seasons where no one understands, in moments where you are faithful and nobody sees it. Have you ever wondered why your life has unfolded this way? Why your greatest growth happened in isolation? Why the people around you often overlooked what you carry? It was never an accident. You were being trained to walk without validation, to move without applause, to stand firm even when the room remains silent. Because true authority does not beg to be recognized. It radiates. And when heaven finally decides the timing is right, recognition comes without you chasing it. Doors open without you forcing them. Influence expands without you demanding it. But by that point, something inside you has already changed. You no longer need the recognition. You no longer crave the applause. You no longer depend on human confirmation to know who you are. And that is the moment heaven can trust you with real authority. Because power placed in the hands of someone who still needs validation becomes dangerous. But power placed in the hands of someone who is secure in silence, that person cannot be manipulated. That person cannot be shaken. That person cannot be controlled by approval or rejection. And that person is exactly the kind of vessel heaven promotes. So if you have spent years feeling unseen, if your work has gone unnoticed, if your growth happened in quiet seasons where nobody acknowledged the transformation, do not resent it. Honor it, because silence was sharpening you. Obscurity was strengthening you. Isolation was freeing you from the need to be validated by the world. You were learning to stand in your identity, even when no one applauds. And only the chosen are trained this way. But there is another ego trap, one even more deceptive, because it disguises itself as spiritual maturity. Third, ego trap number 3 is one that many awakened people fall into without realizing it. It begins the moment your eyes open. The moment you start seeing patterns others cannot see. The moment you sense spiritual warfare behind ordinary events. The moment you recognize manipulation, deception, and hidden motives. Suddenly the veil lifts. You start noticing darkness moving through people. You sense when a room shifts energetically. You recognize when the enemy is trying to provoke, distract, or divide. And that awareness feels powerful. It feels like elevation. You begin to say things like, I can see what's really happening. I understand the spiritual battle. I know how the enemy works. And in many ways, you are right. Your insight is real. Your discernment is real. Your awakening allowed you to perceive what the world remains blind to. But listen carefully, chosen one. Seeing the battlefield is not the same as ruling it. Discernment is not the same as authority. And this is where the ego quietly slips in. It begins to celebrate perception. It begins to admire the ability to see. But heaven is not impressed by sight alone. Darkness can see too. The enemy recognizes spiritual warfare better than anyone. So the real question is not, can you see it? The real question is, can you govern it? Authority is different. Authority does not simply observe darkness. Authority disrupts it. Authority shifts atmospheres. Authority walks into chaos and brings alignment. And that kind of authority does not come from inside alone. It comes from alignment. Alignment with discipline. Alignment with humility. Alignment with obedience when no one is watching. This is why your life has not been easy. You wondered about that, didn't you? Why your path has required so much correction? Why circumstances keep pushing you to grow? Why situations appear that force you to refine your character again and again and again? It is because heaven is not training your awareness. Heaven is training your authority. Insight can be given in a moment. Authority must be forged. It is forged through pressure, forged through restraint, forged through moments when you could react, but you choose mastery instead. Have you noticed something? Every time you grow in awareness, a test follows. You see manipulation, and then someone tries to provoke you. You recognize spiritual warfare, and suddenly the pressure intensifies. You discern deception, and then you are forced to choose how you respond. Those moments are not random. They are training grounds. Because real authority is measured by what you do with what you see. Anyone can expose darkness. Chosen ones dismantle it. Anyone can identify chaos. Chosen ones carry the presence that dissolves it. And that requires discipline the ego does not enjoy. Discipline over your reactions, discipline over your emotions, discipline over your pride. Because if revelation grows faster than character, authority collapses. And heaven will never release greater power into hands that are not steady. That is why your journey has required refinement, why your patience has been stretched, why your ego has been challenged again and again. You were not being delayed. You were being prepared. Prepared to carry power without becoming corrupted by it. Prepared to see darkness without becoming consumed by it. Prepared to move in authority that the enemy cannot manipulate. And when that alignment locks into place, something changes. Your presence becomes disruptive to darkness. Your words begin to carry weight. Your silence becomes powerful. But this next trap, this one hides even deeper, and many awakened people never see it coming. Fourth, ego trap number 4 hides inside something that once saved you. Your wounds. Yes, your wounds awakened you. They opened your eyes. They forced you to see deeper than the surface. They pushed you into questions the ordinary world never asks. Pain did that. Rejection did that. Betrayal did that. There were moments when you felt abandoned, moments when people misunderstood you, moments when doors closed without explanation. You carried weight others never saw, and in those dark nights, something happened inside you. You woke up. You began to see patterns of manipulation. You recognized toxic environments. You felt the difference between truth and deception. Your suffering sharpened your discernment. It broke illusions. And for a season, that pain became your teacher. But hear this carefully. What once awakened you must not become the identity you live from. Because the ego does something subtle here. It turns wounds into identity. You begin to introduce yourself through your scars, through what people did to you, through what you survived, through how much you endured. You become the one who was rejected, the one who was betrayed, the one who had to fight harder than everyone else. And yes, those things happened. Your pain was real. Your battles were real. But chosen one, listen carefully. You were never meant to stay in the identity of the wounded. You were meant to become the warrior. There is a difference. Survivors look backward. Warriors look forward. Survivors explain their pain. Warriors transform it into power. Survivors ask, why did this happen to me? Warriors declare, this prepared me. And heaven cannot promote someone who is still introducing themselves through their scars. Why? Because authority requires clarity. Authority requires stability. Authority requires a mind that is no longer ruled by past injury. If every decision is filtered through old wounds, the enemy can still manipulate you. A memory can trigger you. A reminder can destabilize you. A familiar pattern can pull you back into old reactions. That is why your healing process has been so intense. Why the lessons keep returning. Why the same emotional patterns rise again and again until you master them. It is not punishment, it is purification. Because heaven is not raising survivors. Heaven is raising commanders. Commanders of atmosphere, commanders of influence, commanders of spiritual territory. And commanders cannot lead from unresolved wounds. They lead from healed authority. That is why your life forced you to confront your pain, to release bitterness, to release resentment, to release the stories that kept you anchored to your past. You were being upgraded because the moment you stop defining yourself by what hurt you, something shifts, your energy changes, your presence becomes stable. Darkness can no longer bait you through old wounds. The enemy loses access points, and suddenly, your pain becomes something different. Not a chain, a weapon of wisdom, a weapon of compassion, a weapon of authority forged through experience. You do not deny the wounds, but they no longer define you. They trained you, they refined you, they revealed your strength. But the next trap, this one is even more deceptive, because it disguises itself as spiritual maturity, and many awakened people fall into it without realizing it. Fifth, ego trap number 5 is one of the most dangerous because it feels justified. It feels logical. It even feels spiritual. It begins the moment your awareness grows beyond the people around you. You start noticing things others cannot see. You recognize manipulation quickly. You see through false intentions. You detect spiritual warfare behind ordinary situations. And suddenly, the gap becomes visible. You feel it. The difference between your awareness and the world's blindness. Have you noticed that conversations begin to feel shallow? Certain environments feel heavy. Some people seem completely asleep to things that are obvious to you. And in those moments, a subtle thought can rise. A quiet whisper. They just don't get it. They're not where I am. They're still asleep. At first, it feels like observation. But if you are not careful, it slowly becomes elevation. You begin to see yourself above them. Not loudly, not arrogantly, but quietly, silently. A spiritual distance begins to grow. And that is where the ego hijacks the awakening. Because awareness was never meant to make you feel superior. It was meant to make you more responsible. Listen carefully. You were not awakened to stand above people. You were awakened to stand among them with clarity. You were not given discernment so you could judge the sleeping. You were given discernment so you could navigate darkness without becoming part of it. But the ego loves comparison. It loves ranking. It loves subtle superiority. It whispers things like, you see more than they do. You understand what they can't. You've evolved beyond them. And slowly, compassion begins to shrink. Patience becomes thinner. Grace becomes harder to offer. But chosen one, hear this truth clearly. Your awareness is not a trophy. It is an assignment, a heavy one. Because the more clearly you see darkness, the more disciplined your heart must become. Anyone can expose ignorance, but only the truly chosen carry compassion for those still trapped in it. Remember something powerful. There was a time when you did not see either. There was a time when you walked through life unaware of the patterns you now recognize instantly. You were not born awakened. You were awakened through experience, through pain, through pressure, through divine timing. So if heaven was patient with your awakening, why would you carry impatience toward others? Humility is the true marker of spiritual maturity. Not insight, not language, not how much truth you can explain. Humility, because humility keeps the door open for greater authority. Pride closes it. The moment awakening turns into superiority, growth stops. But when awakening produces compassion, authority expands. Because heaven trusts power to those who remain grounded, those who remember where they came from, those who walk with quiet strength instead of spiritual arrogance. And something powerful happens when you operate this way. Your presence becomes different. People feel peace around you. They feel clarity around you. Not because you judge them, but because you carry light without arrogance. That kind of presence disrupts darkness more than arguments ever could. You begin to realize something important. Your power was never in feeling above people. Your power is in remaining steady among them, calm while others panic, clear while others react, grounded while others remain confused. That is authority, quiet, unshakable, and dangerous to darkness. But the next trap, this one goes even deeper. Because it confronts something the ego fears more than anything: responsibility. Sixth, ego trap number 6 confronts something most people never admit: the desire for authority without the weight of responsibility. You have felt the pull of it, that sense that your life carries a larger assignment, that feeling that you were not placed here just to exist quietly. You feel the calling, you feel the potential, you feel the presence of something powerful resting on your life. And that awareness is not wrong. You were marked for influence, marked for leadership in places others cannot even see. But listen carefully. Authority in the spiritual realm does not feel glamorous. It feels heavy. It feels demanding. It requires a level of self-governance the ego does not enjoy. Because real authority begins with ruling yourself, your reactions, your emotions, your impulses, your pride, your anger, your desires. Have you noticed how often your life forces you into restraint? Moments where you could react, but something tells you to remain silent. Moments where you could prove someone wrong, but you are instructed to step back. Moments where your emotions surge, but you must bring them under control. That is not suppression, that is training. Training for authority. Because anyone can lead when they feel calm. Anyone can speak wisdom when the environment is peaceful. But authority is tested in pressure. Authority is tested in chaos. Authority is tested when provocation rises and you still remain governed. This is where many people unknowingly stall. They want the influence. They want the platform. They want the recognition that comes with leadership. But they resist the internal discipline required to hold that level of power. And heaven does not release authority into undisciplined vessels. Why? Because influence multiplies whatever is already inside you. If pride is inside you, influence amplifies pride. If instability is inside you, influence multiplies instability. If emotional chaos still rules you, authority will only spread that chaos further. That is why your journey has required so much internal mastery. Why situations appear that challenge your patience. Why people sometimes provoke reactions you did not know you still carried. It is not random, it is exposure. Exposure of what still needs governing. Because the first territory every chosen one must conquer is themselves. Your thoughts, your reactions, your ability to stay grounded when pressure rises. Authority grows where self-governance becomes consistent. And when that alignment begins to stabilize, something powerful happens. Your presence starts carrying weight. People feel it even if they cannot explain it. Your words land differently. Your silence becomes commanding. Darkness begins to lose influence around you. Not because you are loud, but because you are governed. And darkness cannot manipulate someone who has mastered themselves. That is the real preparation happening in your life, not punishment. Preparation. Preparation for responsibilities that most people would collapse under. Because higher authority means higher accountability, higher influence, higher spiritual warfare, but also higher favor, greater protection, greater access. And heaven only entrusts that level of power to those who can carry the burden without becoming consumed by it. So if your life has felt like a constant process of refinement, do not resent it. It means you are being strengthened, stabilized, prepared. But there is another trap waiting beyond this one, a trap that attacks identity itself, and many awakened people fall into it without realizing what is happening. Seventh, ego trap number 7 strikes at something deeply personal. Your image, the version of yourself you have learned to present to the world. At first, that image helped you survive. You built it slowly, a stronger version of you, a wiser version of you, a more awakened version of you. You learned how to speak differently, how to carry yourself differently, how to present the parts of you that felt powerful. while hiding the parts that still felt unfinished. That is human. Everyone does it. But chosen ones face a different process, because the higher you rise, the less heaven allows you to hide behind any image at all. Have you noticed that just when you think you have grown into a stable version of yourself, something happens? A disruption, a season of pressure, a situation that exposes parts of you you thought were already resolved. Suddenly the image cracks, the persona weakens, the version of yourself you were comfortable presenting no longer fits. And in those moments, frustration can rise. You start asking questions. Why does this keep happening? Why can't I just stabilize at this level? Why do I keep getting broken down again? But listen carefully. You are not being broken down. You are being rebuilt. There is a difference. Ordinary people polish an identity and protect it. Chosen ones are dismantled and rebuilt again and again. Why? Because authority cannot grow inside rigid identity. Authority grows inside surrendered identity. The ego wants stability. The ego wants to preserve the version of you that feels acceptable. It says protect this version. Maintain this image. Don't let people see your weaknesses. But heaven is not interested in your image. Heaven is interested in your transformation. And transformation requires destruction. The destruction of who you used to be, the destruction of the limits you placed on yourself, the destruction of identities that once felt powerful, but are now too small for where you are going. That process feels uncomfortable. Sometimes it even feels humiliating, because every time a layer of ego is removed, you feel exposed again. But that exposure is not shame, it is expansion. Every time heaven dismantles an old identity, it is creating space for a larger one, a stronger one, a truer one. Have you ever noticed that the seasons where you felt most uncertain were also the seasons that produced the greatest growth? That was not coincidence, it was construction. Because real authority does not come from protecting who you think you are. It comes from surrendering who you think you are. So something greater can emerge, and the chosen are rebuilt more than anyone else. Why? Because you are being prepared to carry influence across multiple levels of life. And a rigid identity cannot survive that level of expansion. Only a surrendered one can. So when life dismantles another layer of who you used to be, do not panic, do not resist it, stand still. Let the transformation happen, because every dismantling is making room for greater authority, greater clarity, greater alignment with the assignment placed on your life. You are not losing yourself, you are shedding smaller versions of yourself. And that process will continue until the identity heaven designed finally stands fully revealed. But the next trap, this one is even more strategic because it changes how you interpret the battles themselves. Eighth, ego trap number 8 changes how you interpret your battles. And if you miss this one, you misread your entire journey, because many chosen ones fall into this quietly. They start believing the attacks are personal. Every betrayal feels like it was about them. Every misunderstanding feels like rejection. Every conflict feels like someone deliberately trying to harm them. And at first, that interpretation feels natural. You ask questions like, why do people keep targeting me? Why does conflict keep finding me? Why does my life seem filled with resistance? It can feel exhausting. It can feel unfair. It can even feel isolating. But listen carefully. What if the battles were never about you? What if they were about what you carry? There is a difference, a powerful difference. Darkness does not waste energy attacking ordinary lives. It focuses on influence. It focuses on territory. It focuses on assignments that threaten its control. And when your life begins moving toward higher authority, resistance increases, not randomly, strategically, because warfare always surrounds territory. The closer you move toward your true assignment, the stronger the opposition becomes. Have you noticed that pattern? The moment you begin growing, pressure appears. The moment you begin stepping into clarity, distractions increase. The moment you begin gaining momentum, unexpected conflict rises. That is not coincidence. That is resistance. But here is where the ego makes a critical mistake. It personalizes the battle. It says, they are attacking me. They are against me. They want to destroy me. And when you interpret warfare that way, You shrink the battlefield. You begin reacting emotionally, defending your pride, protecting your feelings, trying to prove your worth. But chosen one, the battlefield is bigger than that. The attacks were never about your ego. They were about your assignment. They were about the territory your presence disrupts. They were about the authority that is forming inside you. Because darkness can sense potential long before the world recognizes it. It feels the shift. It recognizes the threat. And it tries to stop the development before the authority fully emerges. But here is the revelation that changes everything. The battles you faced were not only attacks, they were training exercises. Every betrayal taught you discernment. Every conflict sharpened your awareness. Every season of pressure strengthened your endurance. You were not just surviving warfare. You were learning to navigate it. You were learning to see the battlefield, to read the movement of darkness, to stay grounded when chaos surrounds you. And that skill is rare. Most people collapse under that level of pressure. Most people become bitter, reactive, distracted. But you endured. You kept growing, even when you did not fully understand why your life was unfolding this way. That is not weakness. That is preparation. Preparation for authority in realms most people never even perceive. Because higher authority requires strategic vision, the ability to see beyond the surface, to recognize that every battle carries information. Every conflict reveals positioning. Every challenge exposes weaknesses that must be strengthened. Once you begin seeing warfare this way, something shifts. You stop reacting emotionally. You start responding strategically. You stop asking, why is this happening to me? You begin asking, what is this training me to master? And in that moment, the battlefield changes because the enemy loses its greatest weapon, your emotional reaction. And when you reach that level of awareness, something inside you becomes unstoppable. You are no longer just surviving battles. You are studying them, learning from them, mastering them. But the final trap, this one is the most dangerous of all because it appears right when power begins to rise. Ninth, ego trap number 9 is the most dangerous one of all because it appears when you finally begin to feel your power, after the awakening, after the battles, after the refinement. Something inside you begins to stabilize. You feel clearer, stronger, more grounded in your identity. You can sense the shift in how people respond to your presence. Conversations change around you. Energy changes around you. Certain people feel uneasy around you, and they cannot explain why. You recognize patterns faster now. You move with more confidence. Your discernment has sharpened. Your influence has started to appear. And in that moment, a quiet temptation arrives, a whisper the ego loves to speak. You've arrived. You've reached your level. You understand now. It feels satisfying. It feels validating. After everything you endured, it feels earned. But listen carefully, chosen one. This is the final test before true promotion. Because the moment you believe you have reached your highest level, growth stops. The moment you believe you have mastered the journey, expansion ends. And heaven never entrusts greater authority to someone who believes they have already peaked. Why? Because the realms of authority ahead of you are far greater than the level you currently stand in. Far greater. The awareness you carry now is only the beginning. The strength you feel now is only preparation. The clarity you have gained is only the first glimpse of what is possible. There are levels of authority that would overwhelm the version of you that existed 5 years ago. Levels of influence that would have crushed you before the battles shaped you. And there are still greater levels ahead. Realms of responsibility, realms of spiritual command, realms where your presence alone begins shifting environments. But those realms require something the ego hates: endless humility. The humility to keep learning, the humility to keep refining, the humility to recognize that every level you reach reveals an even higher one beyond it. Chosen ones never arrive. They ascend again and again and again. Because destiny is not a destination. It is an unfolding, a continual expansion of the authority heaven placed inside you before you were even born. That is why your life has never been simple, why you could never remain comfortable for long. Every time you stabilize, Another elevation begins. Every time you grow, another layer of destiny reveals itself. And the moment you stay humble in that process, the doors open again. Greater favor, greater protection, greater authority. Authority that darkness cannot stop. Authority that opposition cannot silence. Authority that was written into your life before the world ever knew your name. So if you are hearing this message right now, understand something clearly. You were never ordinary. Your struggles were never random. Your battles were never meaningless. Every moment of pressure was shaping you. Every season of isolation was preparing you. Every test was strengthening the authority that is now beginning to rise inside you. You are chosen, marked, protected, and positioned for realms of influence that most people will never even recognize. But remember this: stay humble, stay aligned, stay disciplined, because the higher the authority, the deeper the humility must go. Now, if this message confirms something deep inside you, write the number 9 in the comments, not as a trend, but as a declaration that you refuse to fall into the traps that delay your elevation. And if you are one of the chosen walking this path, subscribe to this channel, because this space was built for those who were never meant to live ordinary lives. More revelations are coming, more truths the world cannot see, but you can, because you were never random, you were never overlooked, you were never ordinary, you were chosen, and the authority rising inside you will not be stopped.